last year when the rise of anti-Iranian stuff started happening, and well, it's actually about a year and a half ago now, I met with a group of Congress people, about a dozen of them. It was a private meeting. Some of the best, some of our best friends. And I was shocked and quite frightened by that meeting, by how little they knew and how little they had been thinking about this. So it began with one of them saying some version of, so let's be clear, we're not talking, right, about invading Iran. Everybody agrees we don't have the troops to do that. We're only talking about a surgical strike against nuclear facilities, right? So I said, well, you can call it a surgical strike if you like, but why do you think Iran is going to call it anything other than an act of war? Because it will be that. Sort of a long pause. And then somebody else said, well, then what happens? And I said, well, it seems to me that the real question is, if you're concerned about what the U.S. is going to do, the real question is, what's the U.S. going to do the day after? The day after Iran responds. And there's silence, and then somebody says, what do you mean? And I kind of almost lost it, and I said, what do you mean, what do I mean? I mean, Iran's going to respond. Now, it's possible they may respond in a very mature way and not respond militarily and go to the International Court of Justice. That's all possible. But do you want to bet the store on it? And they said, well, what could they do? And I said, oh. So I said, all right, here's what they could do. They could, and I started the litany, they could escalate attacks against U.S. troops in Iraq. They could bomb U.S. positions in Iraq, including the Green Zone. They could attack Israel. They could attack U.S. troops in Bahrain. They could attack U.S. troops in Oman. They could attack U.S. troops in Qatar. They could sink a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. They could attack a U.S. tanker in the Gulf. I said that they could do all that before breakfast. Do you want me to go on to lunch? You know, and then somebody else finally said, I never thought of that. I said, well, what are you people thinking about if you're not thinking about this, you know? And the problem is they're not thinking about that. I guarantee you that when that happens, if that scenario happens, the U.S. will suddenly find the troops for a small ground invasion of Iran. Remember, the 168,000 troops are not all the troops the U.S. has. We've got hundreds of thousands of troops in the U.S., all over the U.S., and all around the world. There are tens of thousands in Korea, in Germany, in Japan, in Okinawa, plus all over Europe. I mean, there's troops. If the U.S. needs troops, they're going to find troops somewhere. It won't be easy. They can't sustain it. That doesn't mean they won't try and do it. So I think that the first thing is to say that an attack will isolate the United States from even our closest friends. Even those countries, like even France has now pulled back from the brink that they were marching towards. But all of the U.S. allies, other than Israel, are saying, some are saying we need sanctions, some are saying we don't, and we should be against sanctions. We know what economic sanctions did to the people of Iraq. Do we want to do that now to Iran? But all of them agree that a war would be devastating and that there is no basis for it. There is no threat from Iran to the United States. There is no nuclear weapons capacity. Could there be years from now? Yeah, there could be. Let's be clear. The technology is the same, and this is the problem of, one of the many problems of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which gives non-weapon states, non-nuclear weapon states, rights. You know, you ask somebody who supports the U.S. position and say, you know, the U.S. has the right to be a nuclear power. There's only 5 countries that were given that right. Why do you think all those other countries signed on to a treaty like that? Why would they agree to let the U.S. and the other 4 official nuclear states become nuclear states and promise they would never even try to get nuclear weapons themselves? Why would they do that? Well, they got something in return that they're supposed to get. They got 2 things. One was they're supposed to get absolute access to all the nuclear technology they want for peaceful uses for nuclear power. Now we can stand back and say, ugh, God, I wish they wouldn't. But they have the right to do that. And that includes the right to enrich their own uranium for nuclear power. The second thing they get is the obligation of the U.S. and all its nuclear allies to disarm, to give up their nuclear weapons. That was part of the deal. The US laughs at that obligation and says, we will never do that. So why should any other country take seriously any other obligation? So this is the challenge, you know, that we face here. So when we talk about talking points to Congress is one thing. Talking points when we're trying to educate people is something else. Congress works on the basis of, as you know, of compromise and of pragmatism. So when you're dealing with Congress, the answer is going to war isn't going to work, number one. It strengthens the most extreme components of the political leadership in Iran. It weakens those who are fighting for reform in Iran.